Hi everyone, welcome to the June 18th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, and this week we are continuing with the theme of having some guests join me on these TimeformUS podcasts. I was happy to have Marcus Hirsch on Tuesday, and today I'll be joined by DRF New York handicapper Mike Beer. You've probably, if you've been paying attention, you know that my usual co-host Craig Milkowski is recovering from surgery. I did see that his wife Elsie posted on Twitter the other day that both he and his daughter are recovering. They came out of their procedure smoothly, so I hope that Craig is back soon, that his recovery period goes well. But I'm looking forward to talking to Mike today. I always look forward to reading Mike's opinion about the races, and I enjoy working with him. So excited to do some handicapping with him here. So Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David. I'm happy to join in. I mean, obviously, I would prefer that it wasn't under these circumstances, although as you've already mentioned, sounds like Craig and his family are doing well. So that's good news. And if I can help out here for this hour or so, or at any time going forward, just let me know.
Thanks for coming on today. And we both wish, I think all the listeners wish Craig the best and hope that his recovery goes smoothly. This week on the podcast, we are going to be doing some handicapping of stakes races from around the country. It's kind of a weird weekend where a lot of the high quality racing is concentrated on Sunday, kind of around the country. We've got most of the graded stakes action happening that day. We will talk about the poker stakes, a grade 3 event at Belmont, as well as the Eatontown at Monmouth. That's another grade 3 for the fillies and mares on the turf. And also out in California at the very end of the podcast, we'll get to the Wilshire Stakes, another one for the fillies and mares going a mile on the turf. But we're going to start things off on Saturday at Belmont Park, where Mike and I both have our attention focused most of the time. They've got a couple of interesting New York bred races, actually New York Stallion series races. So not necessarily New York bred, but horses that were sired by New York Stallions. Both of these stakes races are for 3-year-olds going 7 furlongs on the turf. We're going to begin by talking about the one for the fillies. It's the Cupicoy's Joy division. And in both of these races, Mike, we've got interesting situations where we have horses with a dirt form that are trying the turf for the first time. Some have more pedigree than others, but in this race, the Cupicoy's Joy, we've got a couple of horses in particular who are going to take money, including Ava's Grace, who's coming out of a pretty nice second place finish in the Fantasy behind Pauline's Pearl, a horse who went on to contest the Kentucky Oaks. Obviously, if Ava's Grace translates her form to the turf, she's going to be tough for this field to beat. But I know these are not the kind of horses that you and I typically like to take at short prices.
Yeah, that's true enough. I think the pedigree problem and the dirt form problem comes more into play in this race than it does in the colt division that we'll get to next. Boy, I mean, it's just the more you look at this race and the more you look at the races that Ava's Grace has run. Not only did she finish a pretty good second last time in the Fantasy, but she was also grade 2 placed as a 2-year-old. I mean, her form just kind of stands out in this field. And I think it's pretty clear that if she transfers it to turf in any way, she's probably just going to beat this field. I mean, she just looks like the best horse in a lot of different directions. I mean, she's not my favorite kind of horse to bet at what is probably going to be a short price. And personally, I just didn't see a ton of pedigree. I mean, the Lauband situation, I think, has, it's sort of all over both of these races where he seems like a pretty good sire to me. I think personally, the jury's still out whether he's going to wind up being a good turf sire or not. He's had a couple of horses that have handled it fine. I don't know, David. She'll probably just win this race. I didn't really want to bet her. I just sort of wanted an alternative. But, I personally thought that the alternatives were pretty hard to come by in this race.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation because we're in agreement. I mean, if she is able to translate any semblance of her dirt form to the turf, she's going to be tough. It's just how short of a price do you want to take on a horse who's trying something for the first time? And if you don't think that her pedigree is really screaming turf, which I think both of you and I kind of agree with. I mean, Lauband, he has had some turf success. There's really not a ton of turf pedigree on the dam side for her. So I think the question is, how much can she stand to regress on the turf and still beat this field? I think she can regress a little bit because there's just not a whole lot to choose from among her competitors, especially among those that have already tried the turf. Just, it feels like she's going to be short. She's not the kind of horse that I really want to take as the favorite in this race. So I think you do have to use her somewhere. But I wanted to find an alternative, and maybe I'm making a mistake in going for another horse who's trying the turf for the first time, especially one who also could take a little bit of money. But I do like the turf pedigree on the number 3 Shaker Shack. Bustin' Stones is, generally not thought of as a turf sire, but if you look up his stats in DRF Formulator, he actually does very well with turf sprinters. I think he wins something around 15% with his turf sprint starters overall. And while the dam side, it's not a ton of turf pedigree in terms of producing a lot of turf runners, she is a half sister to the very good turf sprinter Oak Bluff, who I think won 17 races on the turf. And the dam sire is Disco Rico, and the Disco Rico seem to be able to run on any surface. So Shaker Shack definitely does have turf pedigree. And if her main rival, that Diodoro trainee, Ava's Grace, does not handle the turf, I think Shaker Shack just merely has to translate her dirt form to the turf to beat this field. But the question is, can she handle the surface as another horse who's trying it for the first time?
Yeah, that was my problem with her too, especially just because it feels like she probably won't be that great a price in this race. I guess we'll see how that all plays out. She does have enough pedigree to make the switch to where it didn't bother me as much. I guess my biggest problem with Shaker Shack was I really just don't think this horse is very good, and I have a lot of questions about her overall form. This is a filly who made one start as a 2-year-old. Actually took a lot of money in her debut. Like I guess they thought she could run. I know she was part of an entry, but I feels like this was the part of the entry they were betting. And she didn't run well that day. She didn't turn up for 6 months. And when she turned up again, she was in for 40. And I get it. She's, been either first or second in all 4 starts since she's returned. And she did, pull off, I guess, a little bit of an upset in the Park Avenue division of this series on dirt last time. I just don't really like any of her races. So I feel like she actually has to improve a lot if she's going to beat this field. I also thought 7 furlongs, if there's any pace in there, I thought that could be a problem for her. I mean, I just thought there were too many things I thought that were strikes against Shaker Shack for me to want to take her as the second choice in here. So I just wanted to look around. I think, as you and I have already sort of, mentioned in a roundabout way in this race, the real problem with playing against the favorites is, what are the alternatives that you want? And there just aren't that many real alternatives in this race. I didn't think anyway. To me, the only horse that I could bet real money on if I'm going to bet this race was the one, Show Me the Honey. And she's going to have to get 7 furlongs off the layoff here in her 3-year-old debut. But I thought this filly ran really, really well when she broke her maiden first time out. I was really taken by that performance. They came back with 1 start for her after that in the Stewart Manor at the end of last year. And I just feel like when you go back and watch the Stewart Manor, it's just a race that I just don't want to put a lot of stock in it. I mean, maybe she just wasn't going to be competitive there anyway. But that was just a race that was dominated on the lead. There was no movement at all from the back of the pack. Everybody just took up order and went that way around the track. And I just don't care about that race at all for this filly. So I just feel like if she could come back off the layoff and be even close to ready and take some kind of step forward, she'll still need Ava's Grace to not like the turf and not run at all. But if that happens, I think Show Me the Honey could be interested in here at a price.
Yeah, among the horses that do have turf form, I agree with you that she's definitely the most interesting. She was visually impressive in her debut. I don't think that was a particularly strong field. And yeah, I get that she did improve a little bit second time out in the Stewart Manor. And I was kind of on the same page as you when I first watched that race, thinking that, I didn't really see that field as being as strung out across the wire as they ended up being. And I kind of doubted that form was going to hold up. But turns out that Illegal Smile and Honey Pants are actually pretty good. I think Honey Pants is running back this weekend as well. And Illegal Smile has done some good things as a 3-year-old. So, I mean, maybe she was just facing much better horses last time in the Stewart Manor. And that was also a time when the rail was really the place to be on that Aqueduct turf course. And Kendrick Carmouche was trying in every way that he could to get her as close to the rail as possible, but he could only stay there for so long because he was going to have to run over horses' heels. He had to come off it eventually. So I think she ran pretty well in that race, and she's obviously one who can take a step forward from age 2 to age 3. So I'm on the same page as you as wanting her among the turf horses. And for me, I'd be mostly focused on her and Shaker Shack, just trying to beat Ava's Grace at a short price.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right way to do it. I mean, it might, at the end of the day, it might all be for nothing, David. I mean, if Ava's Grace, can run it all, if she can stand up at all on the turf, she probably just wins at a short price.
Moving on to the other division of this New York Stallion Series races on Saturday. It is the Spectacular Bid going that same 7 furlong distance for the males. And at least in this one, we do have a lot more turf form to deal with. And I think the horse to beat is posted on the outside in the number 13 Step Dancer. This is a horse that they've targeted some tougher spots with as a New York bred. They ran him in the Pilgrim last year. He was not disgraced in that race. I know that they were planning on running him in the Pennine Ridge before that race was taken off the turf. So they target this spot instead, this New York Stallion Series race. And he just is a really solid fit here. He's run well in plenty of his prior starts. He does have to turn back to the 7 furlongs, but it feels like he's going to get some pace to close into. I don't really have any knocks against him other than the fact that he's going to be a short price in a race that does feel pretty competitive.
Yeah, that's how I looked at it too. I mean, I feel like there are more horses in this race that you could make cases for, whether you like Step Dancer or not. And so I thought that made this race more interesting. I agree that he's, probably the horse to beat in here. This is a horse who I've had a tough time warming up to right from the start. And I don't, necessarily want to knock him too much because he did do some good things as a 2-year-old. He has those 2 wins. He ran fine in the Pilgrim. I mean, it wasn't a race where he was, in my opinion anyway, he was never really that competitive in there. But he was, a decent third against some better horses. So I guess that's all fine. He won twice last year. Both of those races, he could not have gotten, in my opinion, more perfect trips than he got. I mean, the debut at Saratoga with just a wicked pace in front of him. Both he and the runner-up came from out of it and ran 1-2. He came back in the Awad, and again, I mean, that was an okay field, but I just thought the trips made all the difference in there, and he got a perfect one from Dylan Davis right up the inside. So those things sort of had me a little leery about him coming into his 3-year-old campaign. I don't necessarily care about the Cutler Bay off the layup where he didn't run well. I just don't like his last race that much. I get that he was in against older horses and he only got beaten in a neck in there. I don't think the horses that outfinished him are necessarily that good. And I didn't really see a big excuse for Step Dancer. I mean, maybe you disagree. I'm not sure. He swung up there, had dead aim on that thing at the top of the stretch, and he just failed to get by. I don't like his last race that much. So I just, if he's going to be the favorite here, I want somebody else.
Yeah, we actually have a pretty similar take on this horse. I was not in love with his 2-year-old form. I thought he was a horse who benefited from circumstances on a few occasions, kind of like you. And last time, I mean, yes, facing older horses when you're a 3-year-old this time of year, it's not the easiest thing to do. And Click-a-Tat and Good Old Boy, they're not stakes horses, but they're pretty solid allowance horses. And he was right with them on the finish. But I agree, watching that race, I almost thought he stuck his head in front at about the 16th pole, like he was going to go by those horses, and he just hung a little bit in the late stages. Maybe that means that turning back to 7 furlongs is actually going to work out fine for him, especially in a race with pace. But it does feel like he's going to be a short price. He's got a bit of a following, and I think there are other horses to consider in this race. And among those with turf form, I mean, I think the number 2 Dancing Buck makes plenty of sense. I mean, he has to answer the distance question from the opposite end of the spectrum as he's stretching out an extra furlong to go the 7. But I thought his return as a 3-year-old last time, or I should say his second start as a 3-year-old, as he actually ran out on the dirt going a mile back in February. I thought he ran fine going the 6 furlongs last time. Probably he should have been second because Dr. Bluth had a bit of a trip in that race, but came back reasonably fast. They beat some nice older horses. I mean, 3 Outlaws, who was third in there, has gone on to run 2 good races since then. So I think Dancing Buck makes a lot of sense, and he's likely to get first run on some of the closers.
Yeah, I thought that was true too. He's another horse who I guess I would wait to see what kind of price you could get on him. And I do think he's run basically fine in all of his races. I do think that the one thing that concerns me about Dancing Buck, especially the more I think about his 2 turf starts, is that I wonder if I want him going 7 furlongs. His pedigree suggests it's not supposed to be a problem, but in both of his turf starts, I don't love the way that he was finishing in either of those races. Obviously, it worked against him in his debut when he got run down after making the lead. But even last time, he took that race over. He got clear past mid-stretch, and then he, was just sort of holding on to the end there. He wasn't getting away from that field. The second and third finishers were really gaining on him late. So I wonder if I really want him going another furlong in this race. But, obviously, he could just improve, and he was off of a little bit of a layoff last time.
Yeah, I have that same concern. He hasn't really finished those races off strongly, but a horse who probably won't have a big problem with the distance is the number 4, Ocala Dream. I know this is one that you like a little bit, and he was good last time when he ran down Bar 14, who's actually running later today as we talk about these races on Friday. He's running later in the day at Belmont, so we'll see how he does. But Ocala Dream is a horse that's just taken a big step forward with each successive start, but once again, he's a horse who's trying this distance for the first time as he's cutting back to the 7.
Yeah, he's going to have to cut back here. I feel like that might actually be okay from him for him based off his last race in particular. And just generally speaking, I know 7 furlongs, is technically a sprint in these Widener turf course races at Belmont, but I, tend to side with the horses who are cutting back a little bit rather than the true sprinters stretching out in these races. So I think it's going to be okay for Ocala Dream to cut back in here. And I, like you, I just think he's really improved with every start so far. I actually thought when they switched him to turf last summer at Saratoga, I thought he ran really well that day. An open company maiden special weight race. He was very green in that race, but I thought he showed some real potential that day. And he's obviously improved so far this year, in particular last time, not only because, he finally won a race and earned a figure that puts him on par with the favorite actually, but just way handier in that race, kept right up close to the pace, made a good run through the stretch to take that thing over. And that was after Bar 14 opened up a clear lead on that field. I thought this horse ran really well last time. And he was just sort of the horse. If he's going to be around the price that you made him on the line, David, I just want to bet this horse in this race.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that improved tactical speed that he showed last time because I had liked him 2 back and he was just out the back door early, no speed, and he was coming too late in that race. But he took a big step forward last time, and he might just be a horse that's doing really well right now. So if he can handle the 7 furlongs, he's definitely a major player in this race. Typically, I do like to side with the horses that do have turf form in these types of races, but there is a horse who's trying the turf for the first time that I kind of can't resist because I've had an opinion about this horse for a while that I wanted to see him on the turf, and that's the number 11 Hold the Salsa. He was a big surprise when he won his debut at Belmont going back to last July as a 2-year-old, and he put in kind of a turfy performance that day, running a really fast final quarter mile to get past the entire field in the late stages. And he's a horse that does have pedigree for this surface, even though it's not kind of conventionally obvious pedigree. Hold Me Back is actually a pretty decent turf influence. If you look up his progeny and formulator, almost all of his top progeny are actually turf horses. And on the bottom side, while this dam was unraced and she hasn't produced anything aside from this horse, the dam's a full sister to a horse named Sprightly Mambo, who won at a big price, I believe, in her debut on turf for this same owner, trainer, breeder. He's really bred and trained all this family, so he knows them well. And he's been pretty open about the fact that he thought this would be a turf horse, but kind of was just forced to run him on dirt after he ran so well in his debut. And there are so many lucrative spots for New York breds when they're 2-year-olds. So he took a shot in those races, and Hold This also ran well in the bunch of them. And he's probably going to have to improve to beat this field on the turf, but I do think he might turn out to be a turf horse. So, and he'll also, unlike Shaker Shack in the prior race, he's going to be a big price. So he's one that I can get behind.
Yeah, no, I think you make really good points about this horse from top to bottom. He's definitely interested in here. I mean, it's obviously a different race than the Philly division, if only because there's so much turf form in here. So you're right, he's definitely going to have to improve. And it's funny because he actually did, you're right, he turned out to be good last year as a 2-year-old. I was very skeptical of him after he pulled off that upset in his career debut, if only because, it was just a race that had a fast duel in front of him and he got outrun. And it felt kind of like maybe he just took advantage in winning that race rather than, doing anything that special. But he actually showed after that that it really was no fluke. He ran several good races after that. So I do think this horse has some talent, and the switch to turf could actually really work for him.
I want to quickly ask you about one more horse before we move on, and that's the number 6 Dreamer's Disease. It feels like he's going to be the speed of this race. The connections, they really do like to use his speed in the early stages. He typically gets an aggressive ride from David Cohen, and he does have that blowout victory on the turf as a 2-year-old. But was very green that day, actually beat a decent field at Ellis Park. I have some reservations that maybe the connections have potentially ruined him a little bit by trying him in some of these tougher spots, but there is an argument that maybe he's a turf horse.
Yeah, there really is. I really didn't know what to do with him. Obviously, he's run races that are going to make him really tough in here, even if, some of those races have been on dirt. He actually ran fine last time, David, when they took him to Lone Star. I mean, that was a pretty strong field for that kind of a race, and he went another fast pace in there before he got tired. I don't know. He did, at first I wasn't in love with his turf debut when he broke his maiden when they first switched him over to Ellis last year. I mean, he just got absolutely loose on the lead in there and nobody challenged him. But it turned out to be a good field and he earned a pretty big figure for a 2-year-old at that time of the year on the grass. So I mean, it does feel like this could be the surface for him. I think he's really dangerous. I didn't want to pick him mostly because I don't know if I want to bet him or not. But I guess I would have to use him. If he's going to be around 6-1 and everybody's going to be all over Step Dancer, I would have to use this horse somewhere.
Yeah, I'm not sure what kind of price he's going to be in this race. He's kind of a new face in this turf division, a little difficult to figure. I took the negative view of him. I do see a little bit of speed in this race, not necessarily front-running speed like he has, but horses that will press him early. So we'll see if he's able to make that transition to turf. Stick at Belmont Park, but move on to Sunday for the rest of this podcast as we look ahead to the Grade 3 Poker. It's the 9th race on that Sunday card, going a mile on the Widener turf course, and we're going to have a heavy favorite in this race in the number 1 Raging Bull, who was just really impressive winning that Maker's Mark mile last time at Keeneland. He's a horse who has popped those big efforts before, and he hasn't always been able to back them up, but it does feel like if he's able to run back to anything close to that last performance, this field could be in trouble.
Yeah, he might just be in the right spot this time, and so even if he doesn't back up the Maker's Mark, maybe it just won't matter. Maybe he'll win anyway. I got to be honest, David. This is not a horse I've ever been able to get on his bandwagon. I mean, I know he's good. He's now a 3-time Grade 1 winner. There's a lot to like about him. I've just personally never been a fan of his, and I almost want to change my opinion of him now after the Maker's Mark last time, if only because, and I want to see if you agree with this or not. To me, he looked like a different horse last time, and maybe it was just circumstance. I know he had another fast pace in front of him, and he loves a fast pace to run at, but he was never that far away. As fast as they were going, for the first time that I can really remember with this horse, he was never that far away from it. He just took up a position sort of in mid-pack. He had that race taken over before they even got to the top of the stretch. I mean, he just made an early move. I just liked everything about his last race. And this is coming from somebody who hasn't really liked any of this horse's prior races. So, I mean, I feel like it doesn't matter in this race anyway. I'm just really interested to see what he does now, because if he's going to be able to, take up that kind of a position in his races going forward and still finish like that, this horse could actually have a pretty big year.
He could. And when I first saw that race, my first inclination was to say, wow, this horse might be able to beat the Euros in the fall in the Breeders' Cup Mile, because he just looked like a different horse as a 6-year-old. And he did have much more tactical speed that day. Irad Ortiz rode him with so much confidence. He had typically been the mount of Joel Rosario prior to this, but Irad just really seemed like he maybe had the key to this horse last time. My issue is, they went a very fast pace in that Maker's Mark, and he wasn't as far back as some other horses, but there's really been a line of demarcation in that Maker's Mark where the horses that were with the pace have come out of it to run very well. And the horses that were closing into the pace have been absolutely awful coming out of that Maker's Mark. And Raging Bull is kind of straddling the line between them, because he wasn't that far off the pace, as far off as the horses that finished 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, but he also wasn't part of that pace. So I wonder if maybe the numbers for that race are a little bit inflated because of how quickly they went up front. And like you, he's just not a horse that I've ever really trusted before. He wins when he's superior, but he doesn't really have that competitive spark that I like to see in some of these horses. So, I mean, I don't know if I really want to bet him at 4-5 or even money in here, but he is a little tough to pick against.
Yeah, that's the real problem. I agree with all the stuff that you just said. I mean, when you start going through this race from top to bottom, and first of all, it's not a very big field, but I mean, even if you don't like Raging Bull, and I'm, someone who's always looking for an alternative to a horse like him, I mean, who do you want to bet against him in this race? I just didn't really see the other horse that you could go to. I'm probably not betting Raging Bull at a really short price, but I'm probably not betting against him.
Yeah, I do have a long shot idea in this race. I haven't decided yet if I want to make him my top pick or just pick him second to Raging Bull. I mean, I agree that the horses that I've got as the second and third choices on the morning line are just tough for me to warm up to as alternatives. I mean, Get Smokin' just got an absolutely perfect setup last time in the Seek again, when he looked like the lone speed on paper and nobody really took themselves out of their typical game to go after him, and he just got to set an extremely slow pace. And this time, it does appear that Chad Brown and Peter Brandt have entered a rabbit in Veronese, who was used as a rabbit for Sotsas when he last ran in the Prix Niel over at Longchamp back in 2019. So you'd imagine that's why he's in this race, to create some pace for Raging Bull. And that could be a problem for Get Smokin', who has stalked in the past, but it seems like he's a little better when he gets to control up front. And I don't like the other Chad Brown trained alternative Front Run the Fed that much. It seems like a mile is maybe pushing him to the limit anyway. And I didn't love his return last time when Casa Creed was just so much better than him in the elusive quality. So I couldn't really get behind either of them. And the horse that I'm most interested in to take a shot with, maybe behind Raging Bull and the Exactor, potentially making a small win bet on, is the number 9 Penalty. He ran very well against a slow pace last time, coming from last to win that race. And maybe it didn't look like the toughest field at the time because Kanthaka, who was among the choices in there, just never seems to win anymore. But I mean, Chewing Gum had shown quality last year, and he came back out of this race to run a good second in the Jaipur, that grade 1 event on the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival. And Penalty, he had big excuses 2 and 3 back when he actually clipped heels coming by the wire in both of those races. Just a really bizarre thing that had happened twice. I was actually surprised that Junior Alvarado didn't pull him up at Gulfstream 3 back, just given how bad that incident was. And then 2 back, he actually recovered decently to make a run at the end of the Dangerous Hour. He's just a horse that you could make a lot of trip excuses for him going back through his running lines. And he actually has a really nice turn of foot on him and a big late kick when he does get the right trip, as he did last time. And he's probably not good enough to beat Raging Bull, but I think he's coming into this race still a bit underrated. And he's one that I do want to use at a price.
Yeah, I can't argue with anything you said about Penalty. I mean, I would question whether he's good enough to beat this field, even if things do go his way. And you're right, he's had a ton of excuses in his past races. The other problem with him would be, if you're going to try to beat Raging Bull, do you want to beat him by trying to outkick him? And that's what Penalty is going to have to do, because he's another horse that doesn't have any speed at all. So that could be a problem for him, but he's going to be a huge price in here. And I, sort of agree with you about the likely second and third choices in this race. I mean, I'm not, I have no knocks on Get Smokin'. He obviously took advantage last time. When you go back and watch that Seek again, that race was a joke. The way that those guys rode. And there, when you knew Get Smokin' was going to be super tough if he made the lead, and they just let him walk through 48 and 3 for the first half, 45 and 1 for the second half. There's no way that they were ever going to beat him in there. And maybe Front Run the Fed is the second most likely winner of the race. But if there's any horse that's been kicking around New York for the last couple of years that I like less than Raging Bull, it's probably Front Run the Fed. I mean, he's fine. I'm just not a big fan of that horse. At least he'll get a good trip. It feels like Front Run the Fed could really be in the right spot here, and maybe that will give him some kind of a chance.
Yeah, we have the same opinion about him. I just, it seems like he got pretty good a couple of years ago, and he's just never taken that step forward that I really wanted to see out of him. So he wasn't the alternative for me, and I just wanted to find some price in this race. But I agree. It's tough to really make any of these horses beat Raging Bull. I think it's just a question of how short of a price are you willing to accept on this favorite.
Yeah, that's definitely how I looked at it too. There was just nobody for me to really get behind.
Let's move over to New Jersey at Monmouth Park, where they're running a pretty interesting grade 3 on Sunday. It's the Eatontown going 1 mile and 16th for the fillies and mares. And boy, everyone's shipping into Monmouth for this race. I don't know what the other alternatives were for the fillies and mares around this time of year, but it's a pretty nice field for a grade 3. Chad Brown's got a few in here, and I haven't seen the morning line yet, but I would imagine that the horse to beat and the likely favorite is going to be the number 6, Nay Lady Nay, who's coming out of a 4th place finish in another very strong grade 3 when she was 4th in the Bogey behind Harvey's Lagoyle and La Mista, who we haven't seen since then. Nay Lady Nay, she's got some really nice form from last year and feels like maybe she's the classiest horse coming into this race, but this is no easy spot.
It's really not. I was surprised when I pulled the PPs for this race to see not only how big the field was, but how much quality there was too. I mean, there are some good horses in here. In a lot of ways, this is probably the best race that they're running anywhere this weekend. It's a very competitive field. I don't have any real knock on Nay Lady Nay. I think she's fine. Maybe more than anything else, she's a horse who has kind of just been perfectly managed by Chad Brown. I mean, it feels like that's something that, can sort of go without saying. But for a guy who has so many horses that he has to try and find spots for, and so many good ones, especially on the grass, He's found nothing but good spots for this horse. He always has her right where she needs to be. And then when they finally bumped her up at the end of last year to try some tougher Grade 1 races, I don't know. Personally, I thought she acquitted herself very well. Her Flower Bowl to me was fine. The Breeders' Cup was a race she had no chance at from post 13 after getting away a little bit slowly and taken back. So I don't know. Maybe she's the horse to beat. I, don't know that I necessarily feel like, David, that she's that much better than the number 5 Michelin is in this race. I thought in some ways they were maybe the 2 horses to beat. But listen, I didn't think either one of them had to win this race as the 2 favorites.
Yeah, I personally have never been the biggest fan of Nay Lady Nay, and I completely agree with what you said about the way they've managed her. They've really made the most of her ability, whatever that ability is. And I do think she's more of just a grade 3, maybe like a weak grade 2 type. I don't think she's a grade 1 type of filly, even though they did try the Breeders' Cup last year. I believe she's a kind of horse that does prefer a little bit of give in the ground. I think she really comes with her best efforts when there is a bit of cut in the ground, and that's unlikely to be the case at Monmouth on Sunday. We have some nice weather predicted in this area through the weekend, so we'll see about that. But I do agree about the horses that you pegged as the 2 classiest runners, the 2 most likely winners in this race, and I just think Micheline is going to be a better price coming off that last place finish in the Jenny Wiley, when I just don't want to hold it against her because that was a really boggy turf course, and she just didn't seem to handle it. She never was traveling well in that race, and I just don't really care that much about that performance because prior to that, Micheline was in great form. I mean, she overcame a pretty wide trip in the Hillsborough to get up, not against as good of a field as this one, even though that was a grade 2 event and this is a grade 3. But that's not the first time that she had run well. She was arguably best in the QE2 last year when she got a wider trip than Harvey's Logoil and still took a run at her late. So I just like Micheline's form. I've been a fan of this horse. The question, I guess, for her in this race, and also to a lesser extent for Nay Lady Nay, is how much pace there's going to be, because I was looking at the TimeformUS pace projector for this one, and kind of unusual to see in a 12-horse field that this is a favors on or near the lead situation. And when you look through, there aren't really that many confirmed front runners, so it is a bit murky how these riders are going to jockey for position on the front end.
Yeah, I think that's a real question as well. I agree with that. I mean, I suppose, you're going to be looking at some of the horses towards the outside who are going to come out of there and try and take up the running here. I mean, Sweet By and By, sort of feels like that's her best style, is to go forward. My Heart Belongs to Daddy. She's not exactly a bullet, but I got to believe that they'll try to get forward from post 11 with her this time. And so I think maybe she goes, and we'll see what they do with the 12, the Shug horse out there who, Vigilante's Way. I'm not a big fan of that horse, but maybe she'll try to go forward too. Yeah, the pace could be a problem. Michelin's, my kind of horse. I actually ultimately decided to maybe try somebody else on top in this race, but I have a lot of love for Michelin. I'm a huge fan of hers. I've always really liked her. And I feel like she's not a speed, but she's not a horse who has to be that far away. I think she can get the right trip in this race if everything works out for her. I've always been somebody, I want to see if you agree with this or not, because obviously she's fine going, this kind of a distance, but I've always sort of preferred Micheline going a little bit longer. I really feel like her wheelhouse is probably 9 furlongs, maybe a little bit longer than that. I don't think it makes that much of a difference in here, but it could be the deciding factor with maybe for me just to take a shot with somebody else if Michelin's going to be, the favorite or close to it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement about maybe 9 furlongs being better for her. She did have a lot less early speed going back to the middle of last year, and I think that really worked against her in a few starts. And it seemed like her riders started putting her more in the game early in her starts late last year and into this year, and that's made a big difference for her. So maybe she has more aptitude to get this mile on the 16th, and now that she can get a mid-pack position rather than being out the back door early. So she definitely makes a lot of sense in here, and I prefer her to Nay Lady Nay. But who are you interested in among some of the other faces?
I mean, I felt like there were a lot of different horses that you could make cases for. And I, ultimately after, looking at this race a couple of different times, I decided that I'm going to go back to the number 10 in here, Crystal Cliffs, and just hope that she, maybe needed that race off the layoff last time. And I'm not suggesting that she ran poorly at all. In that race at Pimlico, where she just got nailed on the wire by Xanthique, who's also back in this race, I think also has a chance to win. I just, I think the more I looked at that race, though, I just felt like, the 10-month layoff might have just got to this horse at the end. She set a really good trip, got through on the inside, took over to a clear lead in the stretch, and she just got tagged right on the wire. But I thought all in all, she ran fine. And I liked her 2 starts when they got her over here last year. I mean, obviously something went wrong after she just missed in the regret. And I thought she ran a really good race in the regret as well. Something happened after that and she missed a lot of time, but it felt like she was no worse for wear last time, David. I thought she ran well and maybe just got a little bit tired off the layup. I think she's going to run better in here.
Yeah, we have the exact same view of her last race. If I was making picks in here, I would make Micheline my top pick and Crystal Cliffs my second pick. I could have switched their order like you did. But yeah, we viewed that Dahlia the same way. I thought maybe she just hit the front a little bit too soon and had to hold on for a bit longer than she would have liked. I mean, Xanthique ran that day. I don't really know where it came from. I mean, she did get a good trip just kind of tracking into the race behind Crystal Cliffs. But I mean, based on that effort, Xanthique is a contender in here. I just don't know if I trust her to repeat it. Whereas Crystal Cliffs, I think, does have a right to move forward off that last race. And I agree, she ran really well in both of her starts last year. So I think that she makes a lot of sense in this one. But I mean, there are others you consider. I mean, you can consider, I should say, Sweet By and By. She's got plenty of form that puts her in the mix, and she is one of those horses that could be forwardly placed and get the right trip. And Vigilante's Way, I mean, she ran well closing into a slow pace last time. I don't really know what to make of that race because they just went so ridiculously slow in the early going. I just don't know if I really trust the form of that race at Pimlico, but you can make a case for a lot of these horses.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. Yeah, Vigilante's Way did run, very, very well last time. To me, it's too tough of a race to really decide, how much it means, finishing within a half length of Mean Mary's, obviously, with feather in her cap. But Mean Mary felt like she was probably a little short there, going a distance a little less than she prefers to go. And Vigilante's Way just got such a great trip and ride from Jose Ortiz. I do think she ran well, but she didn't run well enough for me to change my opinion about her. And my opinion of her going into that race was, she's just not very good. And I just never really liked her. I don't think she's that good. And obviously being drawn outside in here could be a problem as well. I thought Xanthique ran well last time. I could see using her at a price. Sweet By and By, I think she can win. I guess you have to deal with the fact that, what was the race she was under? She was going to run in the Intercontinental.
Yes.
On Breeders' on Belmont weekend, and she had to scratch that day. I guess a little bit of an issue there. It seems like everything's fine, but I would worry about that. And I would also just worry that I've always been a fan of hers. I just wonder how good she really is. I mean, her best races are going to put her there in a race like this, especially if she gets the right trip. But I don't know. I've never really been sold on her in races like this. In these graded stakes races, I feel like they come up just a little bit too tough for her. And I know that she maybe took a step forward for Saffie Joseph when she won last time. But man, what a perfect trip she got when she beat that field.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, I don't want to be too hard on any of the jockeys that are riding in these races at Monmouth, because there are circumstances that are causing some riders to not want to ride there. Right. But a lot of these horses are getting pretty negative rider switches for this race. And I think Sweet By and By is one of those. Let's move on to another race in this division, but one that's being run out in California. That is the Grade 3 Wilshire, going a mile on the turf. And Mike, I don't know about you, but when I was going through this race, this is one where I just kept kind of drawing a line through horses, not really wanting to pick anybody. I mean, I don't know, who even really is the horse to beat. I guess maybe it's Warren's Showtime, because she always shows up with a decent effort, but she just doesn't win that often.
Yeah, true enough. We went through the same thing, handicap, and it turned out to be, very interesting for me though, because I did the same thing you did. I kept going through, looking at these horses and going, I don't see why I should like that one. I don't see why I should like that one. I did think that there was a lot of pace in this race though, so I'm going to expect them to maybe be moving right along up front. And the more I looked at the race, David, the more I decided I'm betting the 3 Gajetta in here. She's going to be a price in this race. I'm betting this horse. She's going to sit off the pace in here and make one run.
Okay. I mean, I tried. She was one of the ones that I tried to make. I couldn't really get behind her as a horse going this far, but she is likely to get paced to close into it, because you do have plenty of horses that want to be forwardly placed. In particular, the number 1 Quiet Secretary, who's been successful going to the front end, and also the number 6 Legs Galore, who's basically a turf sprinter who somehow stretched her speed to the mile last time and beat Warren's Showtime. I'm a little bit skeptical that Legs Galore can repeat that feat against a field where she's going to sustain some pressure up front and hold off Warren Showtime again. And I mean, I hate chalking out in races like this, but I ended up picking Warren Showtime because I just couldn't really get behind anybody else. And I feel like at least she's in good form right now. She's supposed to get the right trip. And I did not want to fall for the horse that I felt like I was being pulled towards. That's the number 7, Stella Star, who I feel like she's going to take some money in this race for a horse who just has a top buyer of 81. She feels almost too obvious because she's got this late closing style in a race that's loaded with speed. John Sadler does not have great numbers coming off layoffs with turf routers. And I watched back both of her narrow losses last year and just felt like she was supposed to produce more of a late kick than she really did on both of those occasions. So I don't know. I couldn't quite latch on to her. I mean, maybe she's going to be a bigger price than I think she will be. I haven't seen the morning line yet. But I just landed on Warren Showtime because I trust her the most.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Warren Showtime, to me, is clearly the horse to beat here. I think she is going to get the right trip. And she's just one of those horses who I feel like, when you start taking her form apart, and she's lost several races in a row now, has basically been, she's taken money in all of them. 3 times she was, the favorite. The other 2, she was, right there in the mix. She's actually been defeated by wire-to-wire winners in 4 straight races. Things just haven't really worked out for her. It feels like that's not going to be the case this time. I do think she's the horse to beat. But again, I just didn't really want to take a short price on her. And the more I looked at Gajetta, the more I thought, and I am worried that she won't stretch out in here. She's got to get the mile, and maybe she just won't want to go this far. But the more I looked at her, the more I feel like she's actually run really well in her last 2 turf starts. I know they're both sprints. She did have a pretty competitive pace in front of her when she won 2 starts back. But as opposed to the horse that you were referencing earlier, the Sadler horse, Stella Star, and I agree with you about her. I feel like she's interested in here, but I wouldn't take a short price on her. I think Gajetta has actually shown a really nice kick in her last 2 starts. I like the way that she finishes in her races. So I think that she's going to be able to sit this time and just maybe make 1 run. And I just didn't feel like she had to improve all that much to go with these horses. So I'm going to take a shot with her in this race.
Yeah, I'm not going to knock a new face in this race because it's the kind of race that does seem to be crying out for somebody to step up and beat these more familiar horses. So she's an interesting one to include at a price. And it's just one of these races where there are a lot of horses that I really wanted to be against, including Legs Galore, that speed down on the inside, Brooke, who I guess could move forward, but got a perfect trip on a slow pace last time. So just one where I think you do want to get a little creative. So Mike was able to do it. I wasn't quite able to get there myself. Well, that's all the handicapping for this week, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast to join me and talk about some of these races. Always enjoy talking about these with you. And maybe we'll get you back one more time before Greg returns, probably in about a month or so.
That sounds good to me, Dave. Thanks for having me on. I had a lot of fun.
Remember that you can always listen to these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and I'm still nailing down some guests for next week, so stay tuned. I'll probably announce on Twitter who I'm going to have on both the TimeformUS Pacecast and Forecast next week.